All right, I've got 5:30, so let's get started. We have a full and interesting agenda today. Um, and so this is the last unit of people and staffing, the last class rather in the unit on people and staffing. And we'll return a bit to leadership and also talk about managing yourself. And then I'm pulling part of the lecture from next week into today because we'll be spending 85–90% of the class next week on the SMT presentation. So we'll talk about values, ethics, and IT work today. Here's the agenda. The slides are in Canvas. They're also on the Slack channel as well. So you should be able to access them there. And there is a single handout in the handouts channel for the video exercise that's in the middle of the agenda here. So we'll split the lecture up, as I said, between two parts. First, Uche will review the readings for us, the headlines, and then the discussion. We'll have the first lecture then that follows that and discussion, and then we'll go right into the video exercise, take a break. Depending on how the time is going, we may switch the break and video exercise, and then go into the second lecture and brief discussion, and then wrap up and next steps. And then we'll target finishing by 7:50, and then one of your teams will be doing a practice presentation at 7:50, and so there's a separate Zoom invitation to join that. So we'll, as we've done to date, all of the practice presentations have been private with the teams. So. And then after, we've got one more practice presentation tomorrow, and then after that, I'll publish the aggregate of the comments so that everybody can view those. And everybody else who's already been through this, you should have gotten the link to a video of that presentation exercise. Okay. Any questions on the agenda before I turn it over to Uche? Okay, Uche, these were the readings that we had just to set this up. 4 readings for today, the conclusion from Be the Business, a interesting chapter from Being Geek, and then one of Martha Heller's, actually a slide share about her previous book, The CIO Paradox, and then an article that paper that I hope you found useful and will find useful in the future on personal branding, and we'll be talking about personal branding during the class. So, Uche,
So for the reading takeaways and Be the Business conclusion and new CIO for the new era, we don't need a digital strategy. We need a business strategy for a digital world. And then for Being Geek, that is about your bright future. Experience fades and becomes irrelevant without a constant flow of the new. And then with What is the CIO Paradox from Martha Heller, praise from what happens under the waterline only comes from industry peers. Found that very interesting. And then strategic personal branding and how it pays off. Living the characteristics of one's personal brand, not just conveying them online is a necessity. That's very applicable to today's time, to all this social media.
Okay, you ready for the questions?
Yep. So the first question, why is it considered a mistake for a CIO to accumulate all the company's IT skill inside the IT organization? What do you guys think?
Hi, this is Dylan. I would say it's a mistake, just from talking to our mentor, and obviously some of the things that we've read. I think the problem is that when you keep it all within the IT organization, it silos off that, like, all those skills and sort of the understanding between the different departments. And like IT is something that does affect the entire organization. So just having specific skills siloed off into one organization that's already kind of segregated from a lot of people, I think it makes it harder for them to truly collaborate and make a difference within the company.
Yeah, I think that too, because there's already that gap between the business and IT. So, and we're trying to bring in that, like, close that gap. So, I would agree that it's a big mistake for the company to keep IT to itself. Anyone else have any questions, any answers or thoughts?
So there are two ways to read this question, Uche, right? One is, should the CIO hoard all of the people who have IT skill within their IT department, or should the CIO make sure that they're abreast and knowledgeable about all of the IT skill in the organization? And we might have different answers to those two different aspects, in the sense that a CIO, if they're listening to all of the departments and learning from all of the departments and being open to learning from the departments, would be expanding their knowledge, or should look to continually expand their knowledge to be comprehensive across the organization. But if it means creating a silo of all the IT people in their department, then I agree with you. That's what Martha's arguing against.
Hey, this is Mary Grace. Yeah, I think it kind of goes to this idea of, potentially weakening the overall, like, if you are siloing the organization, taking it from that perspective, if you're siloing talent within IT, I think that it, potentially could create like broader knowledge gaps within the organization, even if you're not expecting the same level of expertise. If troubleshooting very common things is siloed to just IT, I think it can just create a broader weakness in the organization.
Oh, good point.
All right, well, anyone else before we move to the second question? All right, second question. So here's an interesting question, because it's, how do you measure success without basing it on your winnings? I've been trying to think about that, and like trying to put it in terms of like my sport, gymnastics. Like, when you usually do well and like get a medal and win something, that's just like success right there. But in the book, in the reading Being Geek, they're saying that like that's there, it's called like your bright future. And like they talked about, like, if you're not constantly winning, I mean, if you're not constantly challenging yourself and learning new stuff, then you're actually getting stuck where you are. So that's why I'm curious, like, how do you measure success without basing it on your winnings? Any thoughts?
Adam here. I think growth is always a good measure of success, even if, by all accounts, something is a failure. If you learn something from it and know not to make the mistake and walk away with a new skill, I'd consider that to some level of success.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, this is Hojun. I kind of disagree with the author's notion that so if you're not finding yourself challenges within the current organization, basically you're just depending on the success that you built up, then you're not succeeding in terms of your professional growth. I kind of disagree with that notion because assuming that the company you work for, you're satisfied with, what you're getting in the company, I think challenges are basically self-acquired instead of, the company providing you those challenges to solve. I think if you feel like you're too confident with the current responsibilities and that you successfully already built up your career within the company, I think you can always like by yourself look for new challenges within the company, and you can use that fact to leverage, maybe, asking for a raise or asking for a promotion. So he kind of he kind of signified if you can't find any challenges or conflict within the current organization, then it's kind of your time to move to some other company. So that was, yeah, just that notion I kind of disagree with.
So what you're saying is like if you're very successful within the company, instead of moving, you can move up. Is what
Yeah, yeah, and you can always find new challenges, I guess, and use that to move up in the company rather than just finding somewhere else to just for the sake of new sets of challenges.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Glad you brought that up.
This is Erin. I'll just piggyback off of what Boone said. I think that like in essence of like the culture that we see developing of continuous growth, that, whatever you've developed or wherever you get something to a certain point, there's always room for improvement. I think that also needs to be balanced with, if things are constantly changing, then you can never allow your employees to like get in a groove with what is in existence. So this is more me like thinking out loud than expressing an actual opinion about it. But yeah, I think the measure of success without basing it on a win, I think win is like focusing on perfection. And I think that the notion of like improvement is more important than perfection.
Yeah, I like that.
What about the flip question? Could success also be measured in terms of failures? So let me give you an example. At NetHope, at the NetHope annual meeting, we have what's called a fail fest. And people, these are IT leaders, stand up and talk about what their most noteworthy failure was for the year. And then we give out an award for the best example of a failure. Why might we be celebrating failures?
Well, looking
here. Oh, are you asking Uche that?
no, you guys.
Was that an open question, Ed? Sorry.
It's open.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was saying if you're looking at your failures, you want to see where you made sure you pushed the envelope and made sure you asked the right questions. And if you're asking tough questions, the answers may surprise you, and you may get answers that you deem that you thought were right, but they're incorrect. And you learn more from your failures than you do from your wins. And it's all about how you learn based on what you deem as a failure. Because if all you do is don't push the envelope and don't make things, maybe ask uncomfortable questions, especially if you're working for a company like NetHope, making sure they're helping people who are, in dire need, then if you're not making yourself uncomfortable, how are you going to make sure that you're able to help people who are actually uncomfortable with real emergencies?
Yep, good. The other part of this too is can you have innovation without failure? Or another way to put this, can you have experimentation without failure?
So you're thinking of like Edison's, well, at least I know
Yeah.
99 ways not to build the light bulb.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 I was thinking that just to respond to Uche, it's like, at what point do you become, like reached a point of success where it's like, okay, I need to turn around and I need to help make other people successful, right? There's a role for mentorship too, and I think that you truly reach a certain level of maturity, it's important to turn around and start lifting other people up, and that's being a successful human being.
Also a successful manager, right? If the people on your team are not growing and learning and succeeding, and you're not looking at that as part of your measure of success, then you're probably missing a big part of management. Good. All right, let's go for that last question, Uche. Go ahead.
So for the last question, is personal branding more important in present time based on the increasing use of social media? So I've been thinking, like, since we're transforming to a more digital world and social media is what a lot of people are using for like jobs, interviews, and stuff like that. So I've been thinking, like, because they listed other stuff as a way to like present personal branding, but social media right now I feel like it's kind of the top way, like one of the best ways for improving your personal branding. So I'm just curious of what you guys think on that.
I'll say it hasn't helped me professionally in any way. It's a good time waster, but like I haven't got any jobs or any real good leads through social media or anything like that. Even counting like LinkedIn, where I think LinkedIn's kind of being sold as a really valuable platform for specifically what we're talking about here, and it's useful for reaching out, but it still requires more on the individual for going out there and finding those doors to open and things like that. So I've had like recruiters like contact me through LinkedIn and stuff like that, but the only reason I've done well in most of my jobs is I've either just really worked really hard and been promoted, or I've always been just kind of willing to say, yeah, I'll go do that job. I'll give it a try. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll give it a try. But that's just my perspective, I guess, on it. So
I think it's a lot easier to lose a job because of your social media than it is to get a job because of your social media. And I mean, that's largely been the case even before social media. It just it puts a magnifying glass on people's interesting habits, so to speak.
Yeah, this is Hojin. I also heard from a friend working in Facebook. Basically, they have a social media just for Facebook employees. So it's like a Facebook but for the in-house employees of Facebook. So what happens on this platform is that everyone is encouraged to post what they are working on, what their problems are, how they overcame their problems. And so basically you post that, and if you get a lot of likes from co-workers, basically that counts towards your performance at the end of the year. It's not all of it, but it's part of your performance indicator. So a lot of senior executives at Facebook are really eager to keep like this follower base in that platform, so that whenever they propose a huge strategy or new innovation strategy, they make sure they want to get a lot of likes and shares of that post. So it's interesting to see how this personal branding is used as a metric even within the organization itself, such as Facebook.
Yeah, that is interesting. And it kind of makes sense because like the more people like as time is going on and we're moving towards more of a digital world, social media is getting bigger and more popular and like used regularly on a daily basis and stuff. Starting to become the norm.
This is Mary Grace. I would agree with a lot of the comments in the ways that social media is important to your branding, but I would say that the degree to which it actually helps you get your job, I think depends on what type of role you're going for. Like if you are going for kind of a more creative type role, I think that having a really effective media presence and like your website and portfolio is helpful. But I think for maybe more kind of like jobs where you might be working in an office, I think it's still important. I think to the point of as others have said, it can be a detractor if you have like a kind of an ostentatious profiles around the internet. But I do think that it is a good data point that companies will look up your LinkedIn as just to get a baseline on who you are. It may not get you the job, but it'll help them to start to continue to form an opinion about who you are and what kind of skills you have to help kind of hopefully get you through like the next part of the door, at least to get a conversation going. But I think the degree to which it like actually rapidly pushes you through an opportunity, I think kind of depends on the nature of what you're looking for and how kind of digital and social that type of role is itself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've actually had a lot of success getting opportunities because of my personal branding. And that's because I am in like a creative UX design kind of job. And I think when people, like especially in creative fields, when employers can see that you're able to keep a consistent brand for yourself across all of these channels, they know that you'll be able to do that for their business as well. So I think it's like as much to show like who you are as it is to show like these are my capabilities, like I can do this for your company as well.
This is Erin. Just to kind of echo Mary Grace and then also kind of respond to Stephen's comment. I think that like as we advance in our careers, that maybe forming an initial relationship on a social media platform is less valuable, but I have found it advantageous to always stay connected, particularly on LinkedIn, with people that I've known throughout different roles in my career, and perhaps maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, they'll post a job opportunity or you'll see that they're connected with someone that works in a place that you're applying for. And if you stay true to your brand, both on social media and like that your interactions with that person have been consistent with what the messaging that you're putting across and the role that you're looking for, that it can be a really good maintenance tool rather than like an initial contact and outreach tool.
Yeah, like that was like reflecting back to one of my takeaways, my last takeaways, when I said living the characteristics of one's personal brand, not just conveying them online as a necessity. I feel like that's very, very important because it's easier to present yourself as one way, like a big successful person, and then not actually be in real life. So, and like put more of your focus on that social media presence than you're actually putting on your lively personal brand.
Good thoughts and comments on this set of readings. And I agree, Uche, with the comment you just made is an important one to separate your personal brand from the venue, from the way, the media that you're using to express it. It's important to have a good understanding of what your brand is before you do think about, well, in what ways then will I express that? However, the expression, as I think some of you have pointed out, particularly when you're in a creative role, is that it becomes a portfolio of your work. It's like Exhibit A of what you can do. And then what I recommend everybody does from time to time is Google your name, your full name with quotes, double quotes around it, and see what shows up on the first couple of pages of the Google results. That, in fact, may be your de facto brand, as far as what's online. And so when you're thinking, when you're posting things online, is to keep in mind about, what are the possibilities in terms of communicating brand, are the things that I'm posting going to be. Because as somebody, I think, or a couple people already mentioned, HR departments and some hiring managers are going to scrutinize, what your online presence and information is. So managing that, in terms of managing your brand, becomes another activity we need to pay attention to. Great. Well, thank you, Che. This was a great discussion and interesting readings and summary. So I appreciate it. Good job.
Thanks.
All right, let's turn to leadership and managing yourself. So here's where we are. We're going to actually deal with the last two topics under staffing and people. In addition to managing yourself, values, ethics, and IT work, as I mentioned earlier. A couple of footnotes on the readings. You may have noticed that both Heller and Lopp are talking about paradox. And paradox is often competing sides of a truth. As I think Socrates originally encouraged us to let the opposites dialogue. And especially this bilingual need to both speak the business and speak the technology. And as you move up into management positions, to not lose touch with the technology, but to increasingly be able to speak the language of business and have the conversations with the business leaders in your organization. And that has significant impact on IT careers. Because, first and foremost, I think CIOs and IT leaders are chief translators, translating the technology opportunities into business opportunities and translating the business needs into technology needs and opportunities. Being able to be that two-way translator is a key role for IT leaders. And as for SI graduates, well, you'll find yourself often in positions between the engineers and the business managers, and whether that's in the UX field or in consulting or in others, and that's because between people make excellent consultants and make excellent IT leaders, and becoming conversant on both sides of the conversation is an asset. And so I oftentimes when I have meetings, advisory meetings with students, that's something that I hear is, well, I love the technology, but I really don't want to be a coder. I'm interested in the business side, but I'm not a business person. And so it becomes evident in the conversation that they're between people. And that one of the messages I try to leave with people and leave with you also is being a between person is a huge asset in today's organizations. Whether it's as a consultant or whether it's in an IT organization, if Martha Heller is telling us to be the business and not lose touch with the technology, then we have to be good between people. The second footnote is about developing the soft skills. So in the CIO paradox, one of the things that Martha Heller advises us to do, she lists 22 things, and 10 of them are clearly soft skills. These are some of them here. Being a chameleon and cultivating patience and being resilient, and then being a good communicator and using language well. With stories and otherwise. These are all skills on the soft skill side that we can be developing, which is also an aspect of being an effective IT leader and being a good between person. So her book on the CIO paradox, and then the summary that we looked at today pertain to that. And then on the third footnote on the strategic personal branding, you know, the statement that everybody has a personal brand. And it's a combination of impressions and traits and communications, and certainly your online portfolio as well as part of that. And, you know, diagnosing or taking a look at your personal brand, you know, there's some exercises you can do, like if you had to describe yourself in one sentence, you know, asking this question of what 3 words would someone else use to describe me? Interesting exercises you can ask your friends or your partners or others to say, well, what 3 words would you use to describe me? And then asking yourself, well, what things do I value? What have I experienced? What am I good at? And there's a few exercises that in the notes section you can do that I've got on a web page to explore that. And then Tom Peters, who we'll look at a little bit later, he has said, don't be limited by your job title or your job description, but rather think of yourself as a brand and what he calls brand you. And then, you know, how are you communicating that brand? How's it being communicated? How can it be refined? How does it fit within your employer's organization or product brand? And if there is a clash of brands between you and the organization, it might be time to move on. But so the branding exercises can be particularly important. There are exercises in the Letters to a Young Manager project that I have, and the notes have the link to this. And if you'd like to pursue these exercises for clarifying what your personal brand is, then I encourage you to look at those exercises. And that, I like this as a sort of in closing, the Merriam-Webster defines brand as public image, reputation, or identity, but definitely a public side to that. And so you may have private brand and public brand, and that's fine. But think about and cultivate your public brand. And then Martha Heller, in her closing, she has a number of closing quotes in Be the Business, 27 of them, and I picked 5 that I really liked. And you know, about cool things today are actually a cost tomorrow. And vision is something that's, you know, ever out of reach, especially if you're refining the vision, you're driving towards it. It's always a continuous journey. If you're more curious, you're going to be more effective with the business. And then transforming our IT transformations or digital transformations actually ends up being more about relationships than about technology. And then this quote that Uche put in his summary, that we don't need a digital strategy, we need a business strategy for a digital world. So I think Martha has a very effective and thought-provoking list of items in her final chapter. So if we now go into the personal brand side and ask the question that as we're thinking about managing ourselves, what if you were to approach your career as if you were managing a project? So if you could apply the project management factors that we've talked about in this class and you've learned in other classes to your career, what might that look like? And I'll start off with a story about my father. He actually had was on the central design desk at Grumman Aerospace to build this fighter jet in the picture on the right. This is the F-14 Tomcat, which was in the movie Top Gun that Tom Cruise starred in. And he worked there for 30 years. And so we had model planes and pictures like this one that were always all over the house. And when I was early in my career, I was working on Wall Street and had vice presidents all around me, and I was aspiring to be one. And I asked him why he never became a vice president. And he said, well, he had the opportunities, but he turned them down. And I was horrified. I said, what do you mean you turned them down? Why did you do that? And he said, well, I love to draw planes. So that's an important insight. And paying attention to what energizes you or makes you come alive is pretty important in terms of what career moves you develop. And when you ask yourself the hard question, am I doing this just to get the next promotion or the next salary increase? Or am I doing this because, you know, I am growing and challenged and energized by this new role? And those may be different things. So, project management questions. There's 15 of them. I'm not going to read through this list because I'm going to go through some slides to talk about each one of these. But these are the list of questions to ask yourself if you're project managing your career. And the first one, as you may expect, which is this is where we started the course, is you know, what's your why? You know, your mission, your personal mission statement. You know, why do you get up early every day to go to work? Is it just a job, or is it more? Is it to be successful? What does success look like for you? How important is success? And then this question that I asked myself about the time I turned 50, this is sort of the halftime question, is, you know, is it about success or about significance? And what am I doing that has significance? Then what are your strategic goals? So we talked about strategy. You know, among all the things that you want to do in your career, what's the one thing that stands out and is your North Star, is the expression. Think of that as the compass of directions, and is also what mariners who were commanding ships would use, is they'd locate the North Star, which didn't move, as a way to indicate whether they were on the right path across the sea. So the phrase "your North Star" is that, you know, what's the thing, the value, the principle that doesn't move for you. That's your compass or your direction point. And, you know, other related questions is, you know, what would you say no to ensure that you have a focus on those key goals? Who's your audience? So we talked a bit about audience, and that's one of the questions in the plans of action that we were developing for our SMT presentation. So asking yourself, who's the customer of your career? Is it your employer? Is it yourself? Is it both? Is it your parents? What, you know, who's the customer of your career? Maybe more than one customer, but thinking about that is an interesting question. And then some of these others, but do you know what the customers of your career want? Do you know what the needs of your customers are that your product as a career are going to meet those needs? Who's your project sponsor? So asking yourself, well, who's the champion of my career? Can I point to a person or persons that I go to for advice on developing my career or my career path? Who's going to be in your network of advisors? Do you have a network of advisors, of people that you may convene from time to time and give a report on, you know, here's how I'm doing with respect to my goals. Now challenge me and tell me where I'm headed in the wrong direction or in the right direction, and, you know, what's your advice? You know, it's sort of having your own board of directors, if you will. What are your sets of needs? So identifying needs is something that we all do in project management, and asking that question again, related to the one on the prior slide about, you know, how is your career meeting needs and the needs of those around you. Approach. The other aspect is that, so if school is a waterfall method, what will be the agile part of your career? Interesting to think about the sequencing of school of one course after another, or a prerequisite, you know, into an more advanced class. If that mirrors or parallels waterfall, what would be more agile, more iterative, more back and forth parts of your career? And there's an abbreviation here on the third bullet. PUL is Parts Unlimited, from our reading. You know, are you going to get great at landing airplanes, but at the wrong airport because you haven't thought about strategy in terms of what your destination is? And then asking yourself, so what are the questions that you can't answer today or are hard to answer that your career product will address? And then if you have a successful career product, you'll be able to answer those questions. Assumptions is another important part. What are you assuming about yourself? What needs to change? What's your personal minimum viable product? And are you willing to scrap it and start all over if you need to? What about your credentials? Well, that's something everybody in the university and the academy is working on. These become proof statements that demonstrate that your career is a good project. What are other proof statements? If you were to do a personal SWOT in terms of your own strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, or threat, what would your personal SWOT look like now? Can you imagine how that might change in 5 years? Options. So we're developing options as part of our SMT presentations. Do you know the factors for your ideal job and how important are each factor to you? What about the pros and cons of each alternative that you have before you, each career track that you might follow? Have you thought through some of those pros and cons on those options? Then consultants. So, you know, just as organizations have consultants, as an IT manager, you'll hire consultants. Are you reviewing your career project with your advisors regularly? That advisory, that board of directors I mentioned earlier, that personal board, you know, and are you asking for their recommendations as you typically would of a consulting team? What about the benefits? So what value add are you bringing to your customers? What value add is your career delivering? And have you thought about those value adds that you can develop? Risks and mitigations, another part of our presentations. So are you taking risks with your career? If not, why not? And can you imagine innovating in your career without taking risks, is what we talked about a little bit earlier. And then how will you be resilient and bounce back when failures occur, not if failures occur? And if ever there was a test of resilience, it's right now what we're going through in the world with this pandemic. You know, are we going to be good at bouncing back from these things and learning from them and saying, you know, what then can I change and develop as a result of encountering, you know, a failure like this? And then cultivating change resilience. You know, how are we improving our resilience? You know, when we looked at the data center and took that tour, we became very much aware of the different things that they put in place to build resilience into that data center. What new things of resilience are you building into your career? What about costs and timeline? Well, are you willing to put in the extra time that it may take to reach your goals? The extra costs that it may take? What about funding sources? That's something as well to reassess from time to time. You know, are you saving towards learning additional things in the future and developing your career? How are you going to stay current? What are going to be your never-ending homework, which is something that Tom Peters actually said, who we'll look at a little bit later, is that homework is not something that ends when you graduate. It's something that becomes a regular part of learning. And so what are you going to be reading on a regular basis? You know, and how are you going to stay informed? What about your metrics? Will you have a personal report that you can do once a year, for example, on how you're doing with respect to your goals? And then very important, how are you going to celebrate? Are you going to stop and smell the roses? Are you going to celebrate the small wins that are getting you closer? And will you celebrate the failures and setbacks like Toyota did with that red button example of stopping the assembly line to make an improvement that would ratchet up the quality? And so a failure personally may in fact be an opportunity to ratchet up your personal quality. And then finally, keeping your project management hats firmly on, what are 5 more questions you would ask of yourself and your project career? And then answer these questions. So either the questions that are on these 15 slides or the questions that you think of that you want to ask yourself in these 5, and write them down, seal them in an envelope, put a date on it, stick it someplace where you can find that envelope again, and then in 1 to 2 years, go back, open up the envelope and see what's changed and see what new answers you have, what you've learned in the process. If there was a way to mail it to yourself and have it be delayed in the post office for 2 years, that would be an ideal thing to do. But put it someplace where you can grab it again in 1 to 2 years and take a look at it. So the conclusion is actually a quote that I have hanging up on my bulletin board. Some of you have seen. It's one that I live by. Howard Thurman is the one who said this, about not asking what the world needs, but what makes you come alive, and then go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So I'll leave you with that food for thought and stop now for questions.
And I'm going to pass this back to you. When you think about these types of questions and this reflection on your own career journey, would you say, like, how would you say, have you approached your own career reflection in this way? And have there been points where you felt like you were on kind of your overall path as you anticipated, or have you had points where you deviated?
Oh, yeah, yes to all of the above. So I've been fired twice. I think I learned significantly from that process. I've downsized myself twice from organizations that were going through some financial difficulties, and learned from that. I shifted from being an IT guru for a Wall Street company and Wall Street business and Wall Street data providers for the first chapter of my career. The second chapter, I was in management consulting for 10 years and advising companies on their IT strategy and on balanced scorecards and things like that. And then for the third career, I was CIO at 2 different nonprofits for 17 years. And for my fourth chapter, I'm teaching at a university because I want to give back to the next generation of IT leaders. So those are, there may be a common thread in those, which is certainly technology is a common thread, but they're very different, career points. I think, and many of them have had ups and downs out of each of them. So taking stock on a regular basis, especially when making moves between chapters, so to speak, and then looking at, my own experience as a series of chapters, was something I learned from Charles Handy, which I mentioned, I think, in the first class. He talked about having 5 careers in the modern era, and I thought, oh, how interesting. What will my 5 be? And so I'm in chapter 4 now, and can clearly point to distinctive chapters that are different from which I learned things in each one. Is that the question? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just curious. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's an opportunity to look back every once in a while and say, from where have I come? You remember that was one of the strategy questions, right? From where have we come? And then, where are we going? What have we learned that may cause us to change direction, to change goals or refine our goals? So, that's every change that you experience in your career is an opportunity, again, to take stock. But even when you think things are going really well, saying, I'm really enjoying this job, my career is going great. If you then pull out what your original goals were, are you making progress on those goals, or do those goals need to change? So asking that, that question, doing that as in Hamlet, Shakespeare reminds us to know thyself, to ask that question of yourself from time to time. Other comments or questions?
Have you ever heard of the Peter Principle?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
About getting promoted to your to the level of your greatest incompetence.
Yeah, yeah. I always wonder how to avoid doing that.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, you know, I mean, I look at my father as an example of sometimes if you are clear about what you're valuing, then you say no to an opportunity. I think sometimes we're conditioned that any opportunity that comes along, we're going to grab it and go for it. And early in your career, you can do a bunch of that, and you may even, you know, change around back and forth. But at some point, one of the things you'll probably experience, and this was another insight that I gained over the years, was that at some point, the next 10% increase in salary doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is what am I working on, who am I working with, and do I believe in the mission of the organization that I'm contributing to? So saying no to things, Stephen, I think is a way to avoid being promoted to your level of greatest incompetence. You know, perish the thought.
All right, thanks.
Other comments or questions?
Yeah, it's Ben.
Go ahead. Hey, Ben.
Do you think that social media has made the workplace better or worse in your time in your time as a CIO and in leadership?
It's made the connections with people larger for me. Now, I very explicitly separated Facebook from LinkedIn and said my professional contacts are on LinkedIn, and my personal and family contacts are on Facebook. And I try hard not to mix the two. And so, you know, I know more about what's going on in my cousins' lives than I ever did, and I know more about what, you know, colleagues are working on who I haven't worked with for 20 years, you know, because of LinkedIn. So I think and, you know, and every once in a while dropping somebody a note saying, hey, I'm really interested in, you know, what you're doing next. Tell me more about it. And, you know, people may write you back and say, you know, on LinkedIn, they'll say, well, what a flash from the past, you know, what have you been up to? So that level of connection and that potential for conversation across the years is only possible, I think, with social media. Or I should say it's more readily possible with social media. If you made it a point, if you kept a list of phone numbers of people over the years and you made it a point to regularly call them and ask what they were doing and mention, you talk about what you were doing as well, then you wouldn't need social media. But I haven't met somebody that's, you know, that's super good with that kind of telephone, you know, work. So I think it's been an asset, bottom line.
Thanks, Ed.
Other comments or questions? Well, we're in that rare position of being ahead of schedule. So why don't we press on, and then we can take a break after the exercise. But Tom Peters, who I mentioned earlier, management guru, so he and Bob Waterman wrote the book that started the business book category of bestsellers in bookstores in 1982. This incredible study they did on organizations that they felt were doing an excellent job and what they were doing that was different. And he's written 18 books since then. Brand New was written in near the end of the century. still rings true. It's fun. I look back at it from time to time. And, he's got these pithy little questions or statements, and 50 of them in the book. And the third one is start asking yourself every day, is what I'm doing right now consistent with building a brand, my brand? Which sort of ties into the prior discussion. And so he's got introduces this concept of brand you in a series. He did a series of 18 videos in 2010 and 11. He's still very active in research and writing. I think what we'll do is we'll go into our groups. All these videos are on YouTube this time, so we shouldn't have an issue with playing them. But I'll ask you each in your groups to watch this first video. And it's also the first link. So in this page here is in Slack under exercises. And so the first link is to watch that More Brand You is this first one. And then what I'd like you to do in your teams is pick 2 more and out of the list of 18. And as a group of 4, watch those videos. And then, so with the content of the 3, then individually write down, well, what are your 3 takeaways for your personal brand building based on the 3 videos you watched? And then what are 3 critical questions that you would ask yourself? So rather than asking the author or rather than asking senior management, what would you ask yourself? And then together in your small groups, vote or otherwise select, well, what are the top 3 takeaways and the top 3 questions from yours? And then put those top 3 in Slack, as an entry in Slack. No names on this. And don't even need any team identifiers. And then we'll look at those after you've done the exercise. And then if you're not on Slack, here's the link to join it at the bottom. And before I break into groups, any questions on the exercise?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yep.
So do we all have to decide which 2 videos to watch and watch them together?
Yes.
And then, okay.
Yes. Some of them have really interesting titles, like the don't do list instead of a to-do list, and you'll see there's 18 titles, and pick what grabs your interest. They're only each 2 minutes and 30 seconds, so they're really bite-size. And the intro video about More Brand is only 3 minutes. So you'll spend no more than 8 minutes watching videos. Of course, you have to select them as well. So say we've got 20 minutes to do this. So if you can spend 10 minutes selecting and watching videos, and then 10 minutes of discussion, or make it 7 minutes of discussion, and then 3 minutes of writing into Slack what the results are, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the things that you posted in Slack anonymously. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to go to 6 rooms, and this will automatically be random, so you'll get an invitation then to join the room, okay? Okay, thank you all for participating in the exercise and for entering your takeaways into Slack, which everybody should be able to look at and see. Any surprises? Did anything catch you off balance?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Well, at least 2 people from our group kind of called out a particular thought where it's not so much the work you do that's your legacy, but it's the people you educate or uplift with you that tends to be your legacy and tends to be the most important thing you leave behind.
You know, Tom Peters tells a story. I don't think it was in any of these videos, but he tells a story of having a recurring nightmare. And when he was walking into a graveyard, and there was a full moon, and it was shining onto one of the headstones, which he was drawn to. And he went to the headstone. It was his headstone, and the underneath his name it said he made budget. That was, and then he said, I don't want that to be my legacy. So he definitely made the point. Now, usually the legacy question doesn't come up for people until much later in your careers, but I think it is useful though and valuable to ask at least to ask the question. So, what do you want to stand for? You know, which is part of a value statement. Which of the Peters videos did you like the best that you saw? Anybody have any favorite?
So in our group, we watched the one on effectively like Shut Up, which was about uncomfortable silence.
Uh-huh.
And the other one we watched was on kind of basically like deprioritizing the to-don't list, but kind of deprioritizing your list. And as something that I'm doing now, I am someone who doesn't like the uncomfortable silence of things. But you know, it does emphasize the importance of kind of like not leaning into that silence, which I'm doing now, but it is something to practice.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Did somebody watch the Shut Up video? That's one I did not watch.
Our group did.
What'd you think?
Learning to shut up and listen to other people. It was pretty straightforward. I think we may have segued in our conversation about instances of when it was really difficult to be silent, and Mary Grace touched on that. And someone had asked if you could share an example when the silence was just like viscerally awkward, and I said it was definitely the time when I used to work for this organization, and one of the chief executives went off in the entire room because there was something had come out on a local newspaper, and the C-suite found out about the issue on the newspaper before it was, after the fact, and they were not happy about it. And so after one of the chief executives just went off, the entire room the silence was just really it was the longest 3 minutes of my life, one of the longest 3 minutes of my life. So I think that sort of touched on the spirit of the video of Shut Up, like just being able to overcome that level of awkwardness and just be confident in when you should and should not speak. And I think the example with the executive is a time where you probably shouldn't stop and definitely listen to the chief executive go off about what they weren't happy about or something.
So the chief executive was ranting?
Part of it, yeah. I mean, they definitely were letting off some steam, but I do remember them calling out like certain things that led to the point where that news story broke out and how it could have been preventable. I don't know if what they were saying was valid, but they were trying to be more prescriptive, just saying like, our division should have been able to catch this ahead of time. There's no excuse and whatnot. Thankfully, nobody was fired over this, but I don't think anybody who was in that room will ever forget that that moment at all for the rest of their life.
Yeah. Those types of events that executives can create is something that has to be done carefully and with consideration, because if all it does is create a sense of fear in the organization, then usually productivity goes out the window. There was a CEO, actually no, it was the CIO, I believe, of Chevron, who gathered everybody in headquarters into a conference room and said, "I've got some good news and bad news. The bad news is you've all just lost your job. The good news is I have 1,500 new positions you can apply for." And he, you know, because everybody scrambled after that because there were more than 1,500 people in the room. But that's how he created change, was to push everybody outside their box, their comfort zone, and then have people reapply for new positions. But that's known as the burning platform approach. You know, if you basically state that, you know, something is dramatically wrong, and we're on a burning platform, and it's the Arctic Ocean that's around us, and so our choice is either to jump off and risk freezing, or we're going to get burned alive in this platform. But the status quo is not an option. We have to change. And that's often a message of last resort. Anything else that anybody would like to contribute that you noticed from the exercise? I think a couple of you mentioned that you know, we all are entrepreneurs. We all can show entrepreneurial spirit. And that was something that some of you even had some questions about as well. But Tom Peters has been a long advocate of that. You can make any job, any department, any organization a wow organization. But you need to think about, well, what would absolutely delight the customer and have the customer be ecstatic? And can we provide that service, level of service, whether it's internally or externally, that achieves that wow status? And so his logo for his company is the exclamation point, because he believes in that wow organization. All right, let's take a 5-minute break and come back and get up and stretch, get something to refresh your drinks, and we'll come back in again at 7:10. Welcome back, everybody. I'll post this attendance survey in Slack. Okay, I've posted the attendance in the Slack channel. And let me go back to the, okay, can everybody see the slides and hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. There we go. Okay, we'll turn our attention then to ethics, values in IT. And so this will tie to the talk that Peter Temes gave us just the other week. And the question for this is, what are some ways to apply ethics to our IT management work? So ethics and values sometimes are used interchangeably. I like to think of them, though, that value, if we value something, then we assign a high level of importance to it. It can be both a noun and a verb. So you might say, I value systems that are fair to all users, for example. But one of my values is diversity, and I work hard to build that into my projects or applications. Ethics, though, are a system of values, or acting in a way consistent with a set of values. And you may remember from Peter Temes' discussion of AI on autonomous vehicles, he talked about having to make that choice between the valuing human life, but valuing children more among human life. And so that was an important part of his discussion. And so we have an opportunity actually to build a system of values into our systems. And that's one way of applying ethics in IT. He talked about the value of the community and the crowd for helping to make those decisions. And then he mentioned the trolley problem. And some of you had some fun with different images you can find about the trolley problem on the internet, but it's meant to be an ethical dilemma. And certainly in autonomous vehicles, it becomes an interesting example. And this particular author who wrote this interesting response that I'm quoting here, talking about the fact that we've been struggling with this for a while in self-driving cars. And so if a self-driving car is heading down the road and has one occupant in the car, but the AI realizes that the brakes have failed, and there's a group of 5 people on the road and unless action is taken, they will be hit and killed by the car. So the AI program has an ethical dilemma. It could do nothing and kill the 5 people, or does it decide that the life of the one occupant of the car is worth less, and then turns the car into a wall that's on the side and results in a fatal collision for the occupant. So a clear variation on the trolley car problem. And there's no right answer to this. But if you were to say, well, if you were to be totally utilitarian about it and say, well, one life is not as strong a reason as saving 5 lives, but then that leaves a huge issue in sales and marketing, because would you buy a car that's programmed to kill you in that situation, he says. And then saying nothing about the fact that the liability and insurance issues, which are quite large, is who would be responsible for that case. So it's a dilemma in how do you program systems. So the article that I wrote on this was about the value of circuit breakers. So taking this metaphor from the electricity in our houses and apartments, all electricity goes through either a fuse box or a circuit breaker box, and that if you overload one of the circuits because you run a hairdryer and a toaster on the same circuit, for example, and it trips the switch in the box, and then you've got to find the box and reset the switch, or you've got to replace the fuse if it's an older style one. And it stops the flow of electricity before burning up the wires, or worse, burning up the house. But it's also an indicator, an alert that something went wrong and needs attention. And so you have to then go and make that reset happen and hopefully unplug some of the items that are causing the problem in the first place. Now, if we apply that to the current day and having concerns about runaway artificial intelligence programs, particularly those that are employing machine learning algorithms and learning from situations as they go, then how do we prevent a rapid overload in the wrong direction? And can we then have programs and systems automatically halt so that a human can step in and make a judgment or correct something? This takes a bit of humility because we have to back off of the desire to insist that we can build a fail-safe system that takes into account every circumstance, and rather than say, the fact that some systems can be self-healing, but that we might need a human judgment interrupt. And that's something then that we could build and design into our systems, so that if it hits a situation where there is a thorny ethical issue to solve, then a human interrupt happens, which is a pause where somebody has to then take action, like resetting the circuit breaker and unplugging the extra devices from the outlets. So that's the analogy I was using in this article. You can read about it more in depth. There is a link in the notes section. But part of that ethical decision in our systems designs is to say, we're going to plan that something will go wrong at some point. Again, that takes humility of design. But if something will go wrong at some point, how will our system fail gracefully? How will it, in other words, interrupt and then say to a human being, you need to take action? So that's one side of it. The other side is thinking about, are there some principles or values that you either have as an individual or your organization has that will guide the decision making? And so one of the things we did at the International Red Cross and Red Crescent is we took a look at these 7 fundamental principles of the movement that have been around for quite some years, more than half a century now, of humanity to universality, and saying, well, what if we applied that to technology? So one of the principles we looked at was one of universality, which basically says that the movement of Red Cross, Red Crescent organizations and the national societies, which are sort of country organizations, will have equal status and share equal responsibilities and duties, helping each other globally. And then we felt, well, that meant, in our interpretation, that we couldn't have technology that worked in some countries and not in other countries. And therefore, we needed to have a digital divide initiative that would address those countries and country offices that had poor connections and poor technology, and how to bring them up to a minimal level that everybody shared in. And that therefore we would have a true expression of universality in our technology organizations around the world, which is what we did. And the fundamental principles we felt had a rich set of guidelines, and there's a detailed table that Jeremy and I developed in this article. It's available on the miscellaneous section in Canvas in files, for discussing how ICTs could be employed with humanitarian aims. ICTs are the more global expression of IT. It's information communication technologies and is ICT. And then how to build those values into the IT goals. So in the paper, we took all 7 values and said, what would be the IT expression of each of those 7? And how could we advance those in our IT project work so that we, in fact, are being value-driven or by the 7 fundamental principles of the organization. Now, a question that arises, though, is, well, wait a minute, isn't technology neutral? Do we need to decide whether technology has values built into it? And Kranzberg did this delightful list of called Kranzberg's laws, where he makes the point that technology is neither good nor bad, but it's not neutral, which was an intriguing statement. So that technology can be used for good or for bad, and it in fact may facilitate an act for good or an act for bad, and therefore not truly be neutral. And an example of that is Jonathan Zittrain at Harvard pointed to a case where in one country the government was offering rewards online for any citizens to identify protesters' images. So they would crowdsource the reporting of protest or dissension to the government, and then in a sense their passports were revoked and they were not able to travel freely about the country or from the country. And this raises all sorts of moral dilemmas because in the same way there was in the U.S., so not to just pick on a country afar, but in the U.S. there were video cameras set up on the wall and the fence that was between Mexico and Texas, and people could volunteer to watch the video and report on illegal crossings of the border. So again, crowdsourcing through the technology to take political or other actions. On the plus side, though, and this is written by one of the camp leaders in a refugee camp on the Thailand-Burma border, to say, well, how do you decide when it's safe to go back? You know, and so knowing the information about when it's safe and when that information is accurate, that then you can go back to your home country or village if in fact you have been a refugee. So technology here are two examples of where it can be used for ill and for good. Joe Biden in 2008 in the campaign when he was running with Barack Obama, said that his father had this expression, well, don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget, I'll tell you what you value. And that, you know, in essence, you know, are you putting your money where your mouth is, so that if in fact you are valuing things like the fundamental principles that I mentioned earlier at the International Red Cross, are you in fact applying IT budget to doing those things? Because if you say you value them, but then you have no budget that you're applying to it, then what is it indeed? And here we see that values can intersect even with something as mundane as the finances of an IT department. Leadership then is also about values, you know, asking yourself these questions about, so as a leader, what do you value? What is your North Star? You know, that compass direction that you can use to navigate. And in your work and building into each project, where are the values that cause you to say yes? Where will they cause you to say no? And where will they cause you to pause, as I indicated with the circuit breakers? And so these are important questions for leaders to ask as well. So the conclusion for the conclusion 2, if you will, for the day is managers need to clarify their values before making decisions, and to ask, in fact, is their decision making value grounded or at minimum value related, and what are those implied values or explicit values? There's an exercise, a couple of exercises you can use to clarify what are your own values in the link that's in the notes section for this. But let me pause here and ask, what questions, concerns, issues do you have?
This is Ho-Jun.
Hi, Ho-Jun.
Since we're talking about ethics and values of technology, you know, I mean, when we come up with regulations regarding, you know, new forms of technology, I personally believe that the people who make these laws are terribly equipped on making the correct decision regarding if this new technology should be put into practice or not. What would be a good way to bridge the gap between the people in the legislature and people of technology?
Yeah, I mean, and Rochelle, you may have some comments about this from the public policy standpoint, but I think the, you know, one of the choices you sometimes have to make as a leader is, if the question that's before you involves expertise that you don't have, then you are obligated to bring in an expert or a few experts to advise you on it. And, you know, this is common with IT managers hiring consultants, consulting organizations, you know, to sometimes review the strategy, answer questions about the strategy. and I would argue also applies to our political leaders in terms of being informed, particularly when I would venture to say that probably most of our leaders worldwide are not IT experts. And so having advice, though, is something that is part of our history and should be part of our policy making. But sometimes isn't. And then you get ill-informed decisions made, or decisions made that are being driven by other factors, than the facts at hand. There's also the possibility of asking that, well, let's run a pilot on this and see how that goes. You know, the notion in the medical field is that you will run clinical trials until you prove that the vaccine is safe and works and doesn't have long-term negative impacts. Before then, you're going to offer that vaccine to the population as a whole. And that, of course, we're seeing now in terms of when we hear how long it's going to take to develop a vaccine for the coronavirus. And so having that that ability to run a trial, run a test, and then say we're going to put off the decision until we get the results of the test. Other comments? Questions?
This is Erin again. I think I'm going to
Erin.
be thinking out loud again. I have a public policy class earlier today, and we had a guest speaker from Medtronic, and they were talking about, you know, the current ventilator and PPE situation.
Right.
And I wonder, because we're talking about like the technical side, like programming something to make a decision, but then also thinking about resource allocation and like the people who are traditionally making these decisions and how they, how there's unequitable access globally to be in a position of power in a decision-making role.
Yeah. You know, there's a, and I'm blanking on who wrote about this, but there are, so a common activity that judges do is making decisions about bail. So somebody's been arrested and charged, and their bail is then set and maybe revised by the judge's judgment so that somebody can be freed while awaiting trial. And it ends up that an AI program that's been developed actually has better success at making the bail decisions than judges do in terms of whether there was a violent or other act that took place after somebody was freed on bail. That the AI program has a better record than the judge, even though the judge says, you know, I want to be able to look the defendant in the eye and make a determination whether, in fact, this person should be set free on bail. And it ends up that it's a very faulty process in terms of human judgment. But the flip side is, well, do you want the algorithm making that decision for you, particularly if biases can be built into the algorithm by the people developing the algorithm or the way the algorithm learns and adjusts? You know, how do we ensure equity, you know, for example? But if I was a judge, would I want to be consulted by the AI system and understand what it was recommending and why to compare with my judgment? Yes, I'd want that extra voice. And so if the goal is to make better decisions and more informed decisions, then it becomes incumbent on us to ask for as many valid inputs as we can, without overloading the system with with too many hurdles to jump over. So, the question I would ask is, where is the decision maker getting their input? How is the decision maker getting their input?
Is that a rhetorical question or just?
Yeah, well, no, I'd be interested to hear what your class said about that, or the guest speaker said about it. But otherwise, it is a rhetorical question. Go ahead.
Because he was like emphasizing all of the great things that they're doing. Like they're the only company that's made available the patent for their ventilators, for example, publicly online so that anyone can use it. So my question to him was just, particularly being in Michigan, right? Like you see that politics really do matter in terms of resource allocation. So how do you, as a company that's left to decide, even if you don't want to? And he was like, well, we don't want to make those decisions.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about like low resource and low income countries and how, there is, and even in the United States, there's communities that don't have access to technology in that way, and they aren't the people that are in those roles. And so just like food for thought, and like, how do we make sure that their voices end up in the systems?
Right. And what are the factors that we want considered in making those decisions? In humanitarian organizations, the question is often asked, where are the most vulnerable? And how are we ensuring that the most vulnerable have access? And that's, if I don't know I've not read or seen any evidence that the question of ventilator distribution is being looked at as a global problem, and it's probably not even being looked at as a national problem. It's being looked at as a state or locality problem. And then you have the situation which we're in, where states are competing, which then raises the point is that usually the price gets bid up, but then the question gets raised about equity. Where is the equity? It's a particularly dire situation because the number of ventilators is far less than the demand. And so if you're in a rationing situation, well, what's a fair and equitable application of rationing? In the big picture, there is none, right? But in the argument of we must move forward, or we must move forward responsibly, there needs to be. So, by saying that, him saying in his company, well, it's not our responsibility to do that, or it's others' responsibility. Well, that's, is that a step of avoiding the problem in the first place? Or is it a step that says, hey, we want the government to make a fair and equitable decision rather than a for-profit organization?
And in these like programming situations, for example, for self-driving cars, is it typically the government or some sort of international consortium that's making those decisions, or?
Yeah, I don't know. What we would do in Save the Children and the International Red Cross Red Crescent is there typically would be a conference call with leaders from each of the member organizations on the call. And the first order of business was to clarify what the respective needs were in each of the countries and the areas. And then the second was who was taking the lead on moving this forward. And one of the countries would need to take the lead, and there's usually a process for determining that. And then there were appeals then made to donors and others to provide the funding to, in fact, then execute on that. So that's the process in a international humanitarian organization. You know, I don't believe the same is done in a governing situation.
Thank you for answering my consistent train of thought.
Right. And hopefully you didn't mind my free association answer, right?
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Well, as you can see, these are thorny issues to wrestle with, and my bottom line advice is to, even as IT leaders, IT managers, is not to avoid those, but to explicitly ask the questions, and to get the input from a variety of voices whenever possible. Let's just talk briefly about next steps, and then I need to end early so that we can, I've got a practice presentation that's coming up. So next week is the SMT panel. All of these are the SMT 4 members. They've each confirmed and they're looking forward to this. We're gonna have 6 teams that are gonna present in random order. And so the advice is review your slide decks with your mentors. Hopefully you looked at the video of the practice session as well. If you noticed in the Tom Peters videos, he's doing a number of things that make for a good presentation. He's looking right at the camera, he's using hand gestures, he's varying his tone, he's showing his excitement or his passion in his voice, and he is a consummate presenter. He's been doing it for 50 years. So watching him again is worth your time. So we need to pick the order of the teams. So this is the random dice rolling app. And so I'm going to click it 3 times, and that will be the first team that goes first next week. Before I do this, any questions? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so team 4 is going first next week. Let me roll it again.
Can you call out the team names with the team numbers if you have them handy? If not,
yes,
no
I
worries.
do. So team 4 is Solve It. Team 3 is Days. Let me roll the dice again. Team 6 is Tech Alley. If the number repeats, I'll roll it again. Team 4 we already have, so I'll roll it again. Team 1 is Mavero. And I'm writing these down so that I can send you all an announcement of what the order is. Team 5 is Nimbus. We already have team 6. We already have team 4. And 6 again. And we already have team 5. Actually, if I picked 5 teams, then by default, team 2 is going to be the last team, and that will be Muse. Okay, so team Solve IT is first, Days second, Tech Alley third, Mavero, forgive me if I mispronounced that, team is fourth, 5th will be Nimbus, and 6th will be Muse. Any questions? Okay.
Kevin's gonna, hey Ed.
Yeah.
Kevin's gonna think that I rigged it.
Why'd you go first last semester?
Yeah,
Let's see if he remembers.
well,
All right. So the ground rules set up in 3 minutes, but this is all going to be on the same Zoom channel. And you all need to be on video and with microphones open. And the presentations are a max of 10 minutes. They'll be timed. You'll be given a 2-minute warning. And then 5 minutes for feedback from the panel, and then the next team will set up. There's 2 minutes for error in any of those estimates, so we have a little bit of flexibility. Each team can choose who will present, all, one, or any in between. I think you've all chosen to have everybody present, which is fine. You'll use the slides you developed with feedback in the practice presentations. Just a reminder again, practice presentations are not being graded. And the video of the sessions next week will also be available so that you can review that. The slide decks and the supporting report are due 5 o'clock the Wednesday, just the 24 hours before, 25 hours before the class begins. And that's so I can send it to the SMT panel so they have those to reference. Let's see, some things about some extra points. The first item for extra points is that the course evaluations, they were released yesterday at this link, but you also have them in an email and they're also on Canvas. Responses strictly anonymous. However, what we'll do is that if 90% of the class, so I can see the total number responding, if 90% of the class, which is 22 people, complete the survey, then everybody will earn an extra 30 points. Okay, so remind each other to complete the survey. More importantly, you've got the power to make this a better product next year. As I said, this is version 3.0 of this class, and version 4.0 needs to further improve. And so I appreciate your candor and especially your recommendations. And then for the SMT presentations, the panel is going to be ranking and scoring the team presentations. First place will get an extra 10%, that's 40 points, and second place will get an extra 20 points, or 5%. So those are 2 sources of extra points that you'll have available to you. And on the final exam, again, it's going to be a take-home. It'll be released on the 21st, due on the 23rd. Focuses on the readings and their application. But note there's no resubmissions and no extensions on the final. So please take the deadline for that as serious as you take the April 16th SMT presentation. Extra credit electives. So those also, as everything after March 19th got moved out. So extra credit assignments are due by the 16th, which is a week from today. You've all done points estimates, and I've commented and reviewed on all of those. So those are in Canvas. If you need to do an additional elective assignment, either to make your goal or because you just want to hedge your bet and make sure that in case you get points off on any assignment, you've got it covered by an elective. Look at the electives accordingly. Extra electives we added from a prior class. Some people have defined some of their own interviews. If you have an interview that you want to do that's not in the list, please send me a proposal on that, and we'll try to make that happen. And again, if you need more points, do an elective, don't wait. And then an important note to pass the class, because this is on a pass-fail option. I think most people are going to choose to reveal a grade because I think most people are on track to do very well. But to be eligible for extra credit assignments, you've got to complete the requirements of the class. That includes all the assignments up to March 19th. That includes the career role play reflections, which everybody's done. the SMT project presentations, which are next week, the final exam, and then attendance, for which you get 2 bye weeks, so it's 12 attending. If you don't have attendance at 12 classes, contact me. There is a makeup assignment you can do, because you want to make sure you have attendance covered, because otherwise you can't get credit for extra credit assignments. And you need to do these things to pass the class and get the minimum passable grade, even if you leave it and plan to leave it on a pass-fail, you want to make sure you've done the requirements. That's it for today. Any questions or comments? We are right on time.
How would you recommend we go about doing the slideshow? You just have us present and then click through, just one of us, or if you want the slides, are you doing it?
One of you needs to decide to be the driver, and you should then share your desktop with the slides. So what I'll do is, before we start, is I'll click an option that allows multiple people to share screens. And so we'll go in the order. Then the 4 that are presenting go on video. So I mean, everybody else will be as most are now, with just their names appearing or photographed. But everybody who's presenting should be on live video during the entire presentation for your team. And then at the end, and you've been asked questions by the panel, answer those questions. And then you'll all go dark again and stop sharing your video. And the next team will share their video. One person will share their desktop and click through, okay? And don't guess on questions, okay? If you get asked a tough question, you're better off saying either one or two things. You can say that's covered in our supporting report and we refer you there. And if you give them the page number, even better. But don't try to wing it. And if you just don't know and haven't covered it in your supporting report, say, that's a really good question. Let us look into that and get back to you. That's a safer answer than winging it or ad-libbing or guessing or whatever you want to call it. That's usually senior managers will sense that in an instant. And you don't want to get caught in that situation where you really don't know, okay? So just defer the, thank you, very good question, we'll get back to you.
I have a question.
Yep.
If I'm planning on not revealing a grade, but I have a couple missing required assignments, but
Yes.
point-wise, I would still be passing the class.
Yes.
Do I need to complete those assignments?
Yes.
Okay.
And there, I opened up a extra credit miscellaneous assignment where past assignments, if they're closed, you can post them to miscellaneous. And they will be there, just to let me know and let Abrit know, so that we're both grading, we catch it, okay? Other questions?
Professor, just regarding the pointing, so the presentation and supporting reports gonna be worth 200 points, right? According to the assignment tab in Canvas.
Yeah, let me bring that up.
Yeah.
It's not going to let me go without. Come on. There we go. So the SMT presentation, these are the break, if you can see it on the screen, these are the breakdown to totals 800 points. So the supporting report and slide deck is 200 points. The presentation is 400. And you've already done POA 1 and POA 2, those will reach 100, right?
Okay, so how much does the final exam, take-home final exam count for? Is it included in this 800 points or?
No, That's a separate
Okay.
800 points. So see, that's listed here.
Okay. Yep.
800.
Makes sense. All right.
Okay. Yeah. So unfortunately, and this is if you have suggestions on this for next year, I'd appreciate them. But a lot of the big point items come at the end. Any other questions?
Well, I have a question.
Yep.
Will we have a sample exam or is just some sample questions to get to know what kind of questions are we going to receive on the final exam?
No. Your sample questions are things I asked you in the practice presentation. So what I would recommend is go back to the video and look at the questions I ask the team.
Okay.
And those are representative of the types of questions you'll get asked. I think in many cases I even said, the CFO is going to ask you this, or they're going to want to know this, okay? So pay attention to the comments I made during the practice presentation, because that will help you practice for questions you'll get asked.
No, I don't mean for the questions we get asked after the presentation. I mean the questions for final exam.
Oh, the questions for the final exam.
Yeah.
No, there's not a sample
Okay.
for that.
Okay.
No. I will just say historically, no one's done poorly on it.
Ed, and for the group slides and paper, do you just want one of us to submit that, or do we all need to submit that?
No, you just one is fine because it's set up as a group assignment. So when it's graded with comments, it goes to everybody on the team.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much. All of you have a good evening. Stay safe. Any other questions that come up, don't hesitate to send me a note in Slack or email, whichever you prefer, or you've got my phone number for text messages, and I'm also happy to jump on Google Hangouts or other calls as well. So if you're in doubt about something, please ask. My goal is that everybody succeeds and everybody does really well, and I don't feel like I succeeded unless everybody else does. So that's how I'm measuring my success on your success. Okay, so I have a team Muse that we need to jump off and get on another Zoom call. So if I'll ask Team Muse to do that, and we'll go ahead with that practice presentation, and I'll wish the rest of you a good evening.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Take care.